Welcome to the Santam Ensure Your Future Money Bootcamp with me, Mapalo Maku.
And me, Maya Fisher-French. To give our listeners a bit of a background, we've been working with Santam staff members where we take them through a money bootcamp.
Last year, after seeing the amazing changes these individuals went through, we realized that there was an opportunity to take this money journey to a broader audience. So thank you very much to Santam for sponsoring this podcast.
Over the last few weeks, we've covered budgeting and paying off our debt. But the reason we start with that is to free up money to save and invest to meet our goals. So in the next two podcasts, we'll be focusing on how to start saving and investing.
I've always met the set standard of 20% of your earnings. But the more I earned, the lower it became. Because the more I earned, the 20% didn't go up. The amount was fixed. If I said, okay, I'm saving 2,000 Rand every month, it doesn't matter how much I earn. It was 2,000 every month. But then the more I utilized the surplus that I got by applying for loans and then paying for loans, when I had nothing because now all my surplus that I had to have before I was paying loans, I would go back to my savings. Then now you're also depleting savings. You see, it's pushing you to also want to get more loans because you are used to having access to cash.
Maya, I absolutely love this voice clip from Tato. She was one of the mentees from last year and she has such excellent insight, right? She had this rule of thumb that she would put away 20%, but an interesting thing happened. As her income grew, she did not save the very same percentage. She started getting more and more into debt. What is the psychology around that? You know, we start off in our careers, we know the right things, we say we're going to save, then somehow life just starts happening. What happened with Tato?
I think this was very interesting. You remember, we've discussed Tato before and we've heard from her as well. And, I think there's a couple of key points here. One is that she didn't know what she was saving for. She had read this thing, save 20% of your salary, so she started her first paycheck, as you do, 20%, but she didn't really have a goal for it. And she said to me also at one point, she said, it never occurred to her to save for something. So she said, never occurred to her to save for a couch or save so that you can travel. It just wasn't in her mindset. And of course, what she found was that the more money she earned, the more credit banks were prepared to offer her. So why save for something when you've got the credit line available? It's easier, right?
Yeah.
And I think this is very interesting for me. You're a young person starting to work. You go to the bank. The first thing they give you is a credit card. The first thing they give you is a credit facility. They don't say to you, what are your goals in the next 5 years? And if one of her goals had been to buy a car or to own her own home, imagine instead saying, well, that disposable income, how about starting to put it towards that? Or if you're planning on even renting, maybe you'll want to put curtains up. How about starting to save for a deposit for that rental, for the curtains? And I think that mindset is quite important to discuss, and I think that's why it's really important to start having a saving goal. And we're going to cover that, whether you're buying an appliance, fridge, how do you save for a fridge? You don't have to buy a fridge on hire purchase. This is going to blow your mind, but you do not have to take it on hire purchase. Maybe there's a goal of deposit on your home or your kids' education or retirement.
Yeah, no, absolutely, Maya. And I think it's such an important conversation that we're having today because even every single time when I do my coaching sessions, people will have a credit facility that is more than what they earn on a monthly basis. And when I ask them, why would you do that? The first thing they say, no, it was offered to me. It didn't occur that I can say, no, it didn't occur to me that actually now that we're talking about it, it does not make sense, right? And I think that's where it starts. Go to the bank, know what you are going there for. Know what you're going there for, because you will get lured into a debt trap by not even realizing, just saying, oh, well, it was offered to me, so I'm going to take it. And it's like dangling a carrot in front of a donkey. You will bite.
If I've got 5,000 Rand disposable income, the bank will probably give me 50,000 Rand of credit. So I can turn 5,000 Rand instantly into 50,000 Rand. It's very tempting. But of course, as we understand, the consequences of that are enormous. But imagine instead putting that 5,000 Rand away every month. In 10 months, you've got 50,000 Rand and you don't owe anybody any money.
That is incredible.
So it is, I think that's why it's really important to understand why do we save and what are the kind of goals that we're saving for. So maybe we should unpack that a little bit.
Let's do that. So I think the first thing when we talk about savings is an emergency fund. What is an emergency fund? Why do you need an emergency fund? And I must say, Maya, your credit card is not your emergency fund. So that's one of the misconceptions I often get. People say, oh no, I have access to credit. That's my emergency fund. No, that's the bank's money. It's not your money.
It's definitely not your money. And it is interesting because Tata also said to me, Maya, it had never occurred to me. She used exactly that, a credit as emergency fund. It had never occurred to her to have an emergency fund.
Yeah, to actually save for it, to have some sort of savings set aside to say, goodness, if a pothole breaks my tire, if I have a geyser burst, or some sort of emergency happen, that you have money sitting there to take care of that. That is a wild concept, Maya.
It's a wild concept, and it's also what also blows people's minds is that when we're getting people out of debt, we often say to them, before you start accelerating your debt repayments, start with an emergency fund.
Yes.
And they're like, and I mean, I've even seen people on debt counselors saying, oh, that's ridiculous, you should only focus on your debt. What happens if you hit an emergency?
You are going to go back to the very same debt you're trying to pay off.
Exactly. So it's so important to actually start with an emergency fund. And I always say to people, try and have 15,000 Rand, because that's a good starting point.
Yeah.
I mean, ideally we want to reach the 3 months of living
6
expenses,
months.
but it takes time to get there. But at least if you've got 15, I mean, if I think of all the emergencies I've had to pay recently, which is, I mean, they never stop, do they? That kind of covers most of them.
Yeah.
And there's usually something that happens, the fridge breaks down or something.
My laptop, the screen cracked.
The screen
it's
cracked.
4,000 to fix it. So an emergency fund comes in handy. But Maya, I like what you just mentioned, that it does take long. And I think sometimes that's what deters people. Like, goodness, when am I going to reach? So let's say, for example, your income is 10,000 and you're saying it must be 6 months of your expenses. So that's around 60, right? Maybe less, around 50,000. And someone says, how the hell am I going to get to 50,000? I have such a good example. I had an email from an older couple that I had coached a long time ago. They sent me an email 2 years afterwards. They say, we have 6 months worth of expenses and it took us 2 years to get to this point. And we take for granted that it does take time, but just get on with it. And I like the fact that you're saying, start with 15,000. Let that be your goal. Then from there, you up it and up it and up it.
So I think another really good one to build your emergency fund, there's two sort of strategies there, is, to allocate in your monthly salary. So when you look at our budget schedule that you can find on the link that we have on the podcast, you'll see there's a line there that says emergency fund. So even if it's 5% or whatever you're putting away, so every month you are putting some money away to grow that. And of course, bonuses or tax refunds, all of these things, that those little bit of windfalls that you get, you say, I'm going to use that to build my emergency fund and to get it to that place. But this is my question to you. Do you think that it makes sense to have 6 months of expenses covered?
That is quite a lot of money sitting in cash. Absolutely.
I mean, for me, 3 months feels, sufficient.
Yeah.
And then maybe a really good point of this is to actually say, where do you put the money? So where do you put your emergency fund?
My emergency fund, Maya, because I know myself, right? Because part of the equation of personal finance is knowing yourself. If I'm having a bad day or a bad week, I will probably go on a little, short left on the weekend, and I will use my emergency fund.
Okay, you know how tempted I was this with the rain in Cape Town to I said to my husband, let's just climb in the car and drive to somewhere where it's not raining. So I know the feeling.
So for me, I put it in a 32-day notice, and I know I'm not going to wait 32 days to get my money when in an emergency. But what I do is I know it's a layer of protection against myself. And under normal circumstances, for example, when I'm tempted to just take a short left, I know that I'm going to pay a penalty. So I know it's not worth it. So it's like a barrier for me. I need stuff like that. I need stuff like that for myself because I know myself. So it's sitting in my 32-day notice. And like you said, for me, it's actually 2 months only. Then the rest, I put it in the money market, in bonds, so that it does earn something for me. It is working for me, but it's not in a completely risky, it's not in sitting in equities. But for me, that layer of protection, I need it.
So, and I think this is really important because people often don't understand the different types of accounts that you have with the bank. So you have your transactional account, obviously, which is where your salary gets paid in. Yes. Hopefully you have salary and that gets paid in there. You don't want to leave your emergency fund in there.
No, I will use it.
Of course, I would use it too. It would be like, this feels like an emergency. So then you've got something like these little savings accounts that are often linked to your bank account. Certainly I'm with Nedbank, and they've got those little
savings pockets,
which I can call. And maybe this is going a little bit onto the next topic about how we manage lumpy expenses, but I often put a little bit of money in those because they are instantly available. So for medical bills, things like that. So I carry a little bit of a balance in one of those for if I need to kind of work through something during the month. I have to go to the physio that wasn't in the budget, so that I can just sort of transfer out of there. So I use a portion for that, and then definitely you've got your 24-hour notice accounts. I must be honest, that I use for more like my holiday fund and things like that. So 24-hour notice means you have to notify the bank a day in advance before you want it. But then you get things like 7-day notice, 32-day notice, and all that simply means is that you have to tell the bank that you need the money in a certain amount of time.
Otherwise, you incur a penalty.
Exactly. So I think it's, for me, sometimes also helps to split the money up a little bit. So you've got some fairly ready cash should you need it. Again, know yourself.
Yeah. Very important.
So you may need a little bit of kind of, I use that sometimes just to, even out the month. And then you've got I also have a fixed, a 32-day notice that I put money in every single month, and it's growing quite nicely, and I just leave it there as my emergency fund.
It does incur some interest as well, which is quite lovely.
Yeah, so they do earn a little bit of interest. And then I also put quite a bulk into my mortgage. So I sit with my mortgage.
I was going to ask that, because oftentimes people say, what if I just put it into my access bond? First of all, how does that work out, Maya? Putting extra into your access bond, and if you are having an emergency, how do you go about taking out that money?
So I think that's for me. So there's two different types of emergencies. One is those short life events like the fridge or the medical bill or something like that, and that's the money that I keep a little bit more liquid. But, the emergency of when we're talking 3-6 months of expenses is the retrenchment. It's a hit in your income. So that's, I feel like I can leave in my mortgage knowing that I can effectively pull down from that if I needed to. But remember, I have put extra into my mortgage. So it's not just like I'm drawing down randomly and putting myself further into debt. It's just that, if I'm going to be putting away 200,000, 300,000 Rand, which, that's kind of the cushion that I've built up because I have my own business, remember. So I need quite a big business. You and I need a very different level of protection.
Of cushion,
And, that kind of money to me feels like if I got it in the mortgage and I'm, saving the interest there of 11%, that kind of makes sense for me. Rather than also, earning interest and paying tax on it. So I think everyone needs to look at it in their own way.
Yeah. But let's be practical, Maya, because even with myself, I've just always battled with, okay, if we were to put it into the mortgage, because we've always paid extra towards our bond. If I'm saying I'm putting away this massive lump sum and it's for emergencies, should we really get there? How do you access it? Do you call the bank one day and say, hey, well, I want that part that I've put in?
Absolutely. So there's a couple of things you can do. If you're in advance of your mortgage, you can obviously cut back your repayments. So I pay in a lot extra every month. So I can just go back to the minimum that I need to pay. But I think for me, what I would rather do is draw it down. I'd rather say, draw down the 100,000 to pay my bills that I need to pay. But of course, you draw it down per month. So you don't go and draw it down. You say, well, now I'm in a tight place. Let me take my 3 months of emergency savings there, because then you're paying interest from day one.
Yes.
So I think a good way to do that is to draw down what expenses you need to cover for that month. And then you draw it down and then you pay those expenses. And just keep in mind, obviously, that you've still got to keep your bond repayments going. So you've got to build that into the equation. I mean, I have to be honest, I haven't had to do it yet.
Yes,
But
yes.
if I was faced with that, that's exactly what I would do. I would say, do a proper budget. And we've spoken about survival
Yes,
budgets
yes,
before,
yes.
and say, right, what is the bare minimum I need? I will draw that this month from the mortgage, but obviously paying back the mortgage is one of the costs that I have
That
to
you
be
have to,
covering.
yes.
So, that's the way that you need to work it.
Okay. Perfect. I love that, Maya. And for me, it's always fascinating the fact that we are always going back to budgeting. We are always going back to budgeting. So that's number one when it comes to savings for emergency. You can save for holiday. Did you know you can go on holiday without using debt, Maya?
Really?
Yes.
Now, that's funny because I didn't know that, because there's a huge billboard on the way to the airport, and I will not mention which credit provider it is, who
Yep.
says, and of course, Cape Town's wet and raining right now, and it says, feel like a Greek island holiday? We've got the loan for you. I just want to go and tear that frigging sign down.
Imagine.
I know. And that's the reality. Most people, that's what they do. They say,
Yeah.
oh, let me go on holiday and
Yeah.
pay it back.
And that is, you know what? For me, I think at the end of this podcast, I want people to have a shift in mindset when it comes to saving for things that you want. So for a holiday, plan for it. I mean, normally it's not on a whim, right? Plan for it and say, look at your year and say, all right, in March, I know it's my birthday. Perhaps I want to do something. In September, it's my partner's birthday, the kids' birthdays, or this is Christmas and we're going to travel. Sit down with your partner and plan your lives and say, what do we want as a family? Do we want to travel once a year? Is it going to be to Cape Town? Is it going to be to Durban? Then start writing it into your budget and saying, how much are we going to put away towards this thing? Maya, when we moved into our house, and I know I've said this story many times, we didn't buy a couch. We didn't buy anything new from our small flat into a house. We moved in and we saved every single month for the furniture that we wanted and desired for a whole year. For a whole year, Maya. We still had that small round table. It fit like into a corner and there was a massive space just empty. But we knew that I did not want to sit on a couch that I owed.
Exactly.
I just did not want to.
You're sitting there thinking, oh, this couch, I've got to remember, because if I don't pay next month, they're going to come and take it away. And you've also got time to think about it, to shop around. And I think we've spoken about this before. I can't remember, about the psychology of money, where your dopamine levels are actually around anticipation. So you get the retail high from anticipation. So you are anticipating for a whole year that couch.
Yeah.
You're getting so much joy out of buying that couch. For a whole year, you're thinking about it, looking at it, shopping. That is actually going to give you a much bigger high than going on, putting on, buying it
credit
today
card
and then
and-
paying it off over the next 2 years, by the way, because
That is insane.
You pay back double the cost.
Yeah, no,
And
100%.
I just, I don't think people really, really understand that, and I'm so glad you've made this point as well. And I mean, if I think about, my Japan trip, that was my 25th wedding anniversary. It was 5 years of planning. We don't just suddenly put it on the credit card. And I think that's important. But I do save for holidays. I love my holidays. I use my little account that's linked to my bank account. And I think what's really important, and I would also encourage everyone, go find out what your bank offers and what interest rate they offer on those products.
Yeah. And also don't just go with the people that you've been banking with. Shop around. Say, okay, my bank offers this. Let me see what else is out there. What do other banks offer? We are so married to our banks. It's insanity for me.
Yeah. Absolutely, and spend a little bit of time. And even if it's, on mine, these little savings accounts that are linked to my bank account with Nedbank, they're actually paying really good interest. And I didn't realize until I opened, I was looking, I thought, gosh, this is actually a good interest rate.
interest, yeah.
And sometimes the banks, they're trying to promote a certain product. I think that one's called Just Save or something.
Yes.
And they'll actually offer quite high interest. So I think it is worthwhile also just looking into the interest rates and seeing how to, how you can save and get a little bit of a boost on those savings. I mean, look, every rand helps towards the holiday. So, I mean, we've spoken about the emergency fund, and saving for your holiday. But also the other thing that I find people do not plan for at all are the expenses they know of that are coming up. They come up every year. School fees, a car service, birthdays.
Yeah.
And those are not necessarily something we have every single month. So when it happens, it becomes this thing where you go into overdraft for it.
Yes. No, 100%. And with one of the mentees, what I asked them, I said, draw up a budget for 6 months. And they looked at me like I was crazy. Like 6 months. I said, I mean, your normal, regular expenses, your fixed expenses, put them in there. But you know that in September, it's someone's birthday, right? You put it in there. So already you're anticipating that this month or in the next 2 months, or I need to start putting money away for a birthday gift. Because normally those are the things that end up, digging into our pockets, and we're thinking to ourselves, where did my money go?
And so also interesting, one of my mentees we're working with this year, her son's birthday is in February. And she wants to give him a really, really great birthday party.
Yes.
And I said, right, how much do you want to spend? This is the amount. Okay, how are we going to reach there? What do we need to put away each month now into that? And again, these little savings accounts linked to your bank account. And I said, call it the name of the birthday party, your son's name, and start putting the money into there. Because I'll tell you one thing. You were talking about the discipline of not drawing on your emergency fund. If you give something a name, and especially if it's got your child's name on it, you're a lot less likely to draw on it to go and buy shoes, right? You're going to say, oh, no, that's my son's birthday party money. So I'm a really big fan of these little savings pockets, naming them, having a goal for each of them. And I think that's a really, really important part of planning. And the other thing is things like car maintenance. And I call that a contingency fund rather than an emergency fund. So the emergency fund of things that you don't know are going to happen.
Yes.
But what about just saying, you know what, I'm going to have a car service sometime this year. I'm probably going to have to put tires on my car at some point. And actually just building up a little bit of buffer for those sorts of expenses that again are going to come up during the year.
No, absolutely. So what about, where do you put your child's education? So for the medium term, let's say, for example, in the following year, we are in what now?
Where are we? July.
July.
Well, where are we? No.
August.
Yeah,
we're in August.
Sorry, that's going to sound very weird to the listeners, but the reason is that we're pre-recording this time. We're trying to work out when we're releasing it.
But we're still within this year.
Yes,
okay,
we're
in
within this year.
2024. But you know that your child is going to school,
in
primary, high school, university next year. Where do you put this money? Because oftentimes people say, oh no, I want X amount. Should I be putting it into a proper investment? Should I be putting it into just a normal savings account? Because it is short term.
So I think it's important, today we're really talking about saving. And saving is very much short term, the next year or two, okay? And I think in the next podcast, we must discuss saving for your child's tertiary education in 10 years' time. Because those are very different things.
Yeah.
So if your kid's you want to send your child to university in 10 years' time, we're going to talk about that in the next podcast. But yes, in January, my son's university fees are due. And let me tell you, university res, it's a lot of money. So what we do personally is we actually put that into our mortgage as well. So we do put that in, and then we draw it out in January, and we put in every single month that extra. But I also have, for more sort of contingency fees or other expenses, I do have a little account called school fees.
Yeah.
So, that. But I think it's either or. You can just put that into your little savings account that is called school fees, and then in January you've got the money and you can pay for it. Or even if it's not that you're going to pay it in full, maybe next year you're going to pay every month for your school fees, but you're building up a little bit of a pocket for next year for the school tour or the unexpected expenses. So I think I use both. And you?
No, I definitely use a completely separate account. It's actually, and on there in the savings pocket is written Moilete school fees, Molimo school fees, and every single month we put money into that so that at the beginning of the following year, so in 2025, we have the full amount and we get that 10% off. It doesn't, it's not a lot of money, but I think it does. I will take any discount, Maya. I will take any discount any day.
But I think what's also great is you start the year knowing you can pay your child's school fees.
Yes.
It's not like, as you enroll that child, you can literally say, here's the money, it's done.
And
It's a
I
big
don't have to
box.
think
I
about
know.
it. For me, it's one of the biggest reliefs. So this year we couldn't do that. We paid half the school fees. We paid only for 6 months. For 6 months. Then to say, okay, we'll pay it off every single month after that. But it's such a big relief knowing that there are funds for this child. I don't have to worry about it. I don't have to really think about it. It's such a massive relief for me.
Absolutely, and I think it's really important for us to discuss in the next podcast. The bigger, getting ready
longer
for
term.
university
Yes,
and getting ready
yes.
for those bigger school fees, even if it's a private school fee for high school, whatever your goals are. We're definitely going to be discussing that next week. But before, I do want to get on to some of the goals that maybe in a year or 2 years' time, the parents, a deposit on your home and things like that. But before I do, one thing we didn't mention is where not to put your emergency fund. Because you had a mentee last year who was using her tax-free savings account as an emergency fund.
Yes, Maya, that is so important. So she was putting away 3,000, the maximum that you can put into a tax-free savings account. And she was doing this saying, I'm saving for my child's education for the following year. And at the beginning of the year, she would take out these funds and pay the school fees. That is one way you do not use your tax-free savings account. So for short-term savings, use a simple savings bank account, where you earn minimum interest, that you won't lose the money, that it's easily accessible. I think that is very, very, very important, Maya.
Very. And I think, I want to unpack this in the next podcast when we talk about tax-free savings accounts. But, you do not need to save tax on interest when you're just putting 3,000 Rand away a month, okay? You already have 23,500 Rand, I think it is, that you can get tax-free interest. You don't pay tax on your first 23,800 Rand of interest anyway. So don't waste this precious resource of a tax-free savings account on something that you're going to be putting into cash, into interest bearing, and you're going to draw it out every year.
And the thing is, one of the things one of the mentees realized this year when we spoke about a tax-free savings account and what not to do, which we'll get into much deeper, you are eating away at the lifetime limit. When she realized that, she was just gobsmacked as well. And again, every single year we see how people just use this tool, this investment tool, completely the wrong way. So if anything you get out of this is that do not use your tax-free savings account as a normal savings
for short-term goals.
Exactly.
So I would say anything that's less than 10 years, you shouldn't really be using a tax-free savings account. But we will explain more of this in the next podcast, which is why we're putting the teaser in now so that you'll definitely sign up for it. But what about goals so we've spoken about, I suppose school fees next year, but what about things like a deposit on your home or building your parents' a home? That's an interesting conversation.
Very interesting, Maya. What I found, and remember again, we go back to how we view money, how we perceive money, right? One of the things a mentee told me was that they built their parents a home. They say, I grew up in such a hard way. My parents didn't have a home. And one thing I've always told myself was, when I get a job, I'm going to build my parents a home. And it's a noble thing. It's a wonderful thing. If you can, absolutely do it. But what people do is that they put themselves under so much pressure, they end up taking out personal loans, credit card, and all sorts of credit lines to build a home, whereas the thinking should be, how much is it going to cost for me to build this home? For her, it cost her 300,000, right? And she went and took out a personal loan, and the personal loan was on 25% interest. That is incredible. That is a lot of money. Versus saying, you know what? I'm going to start putting away 5,000. We have a goal to say in 3 years' time, we'll build this home, or in 4 years' time. And you tell your parents, you bring them into the conversation and say, this is the plan. This is how much it's going to cost, and it's going to take me 3 years. How else, if you have siblings, bring them into that conversation as well and say, this is how much we're going to need, and this is how much we can save every month. And after 3 years, you are completely debt-free.
Yeah. I mean, I was just thinking about it. You were saying sort of 25%, and I was doing the maths in my head on 300,000. You're looking at about 70,000 Rand in interest in 1 year. In interest.
In 1
And we're not
year.
talking about initiation fees, service fees, all these other wonderful costs that the credit providers add on.
Yeah.
why can you not? Your parents have waited this long, another 3 years.
Yes,
Why not?
yes.
Rather do it in a way that's sustainable, and that you can really, really be able to do it for your parents in a way that's not going to bury you, and
Yeah.
make credit providers rich. Rather make yourself rich. This is how you make yourself rich. You don't go and borrow money to build your parents a home. You save the money up and you build it. And I think that's also really, really important. And same if you're looking to buy a home. We discussed this quite a lot
Yes.
in a previous episode. But things just starting to save towards something and setting a goal in a year or 2 years' time is really the way to reach your goals.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, our parents did it so well, Maya. I remember growing up, my parents, and I think I also told this story before, that growing up, I saw my parents saving for absolutely everything. It was so annoying, Maya, because we wanted the latest thing, like everybody else. We still had, when people were having this flat screen TVs, we still had that big one that has
big
like
box.
oh
My child wouldn't know what
how
that was.
embarrassing.
They're so
How
old now.
embarrassing. But literally, my mom is the type of person who will say, okay, how much does it cost? She breaks it down, says, okay, every month I need to save this much, and I know I'll have this item in the next how many ever months. And everything that she has ever owned, my mother has bought with cash. And trust me, as a young person growing up, everybody else has like very sexy things in their household. And your mom is still waiting and telling you, no, we'll probably have it in a year and 6 months' time. But I promise you, it's worth it. It's worth it. Once you have that thing and you know it's yours and you're not paying it back with interest on top of that, it's really empowering, I find.
And also, the joy of ownership doesn't last as long as the repayments do. I think it's a really good place to end it. As I said, we just wanted to look at those more immediate savings for a goal in the next year or two. So it's your emergency fund. We've discussed, Maplo and I both have very different approaches, so you can choose which one works for you.
And that's the lovely thing, Maya, about this podcast is that we have two voices, and we manage our money slightly different. But the thing is, it's your personal finance journey. Find something that works for you and just run with it.
Absolutely. So that's it. Emergency fund. Do an annual budget so that you know the things that are coming up, and put the money aside for that. We've discussed those little linked accounts to your bank account, really good for those. If you're looking to build your parents a home or your own home or your own deposit, start putting money away for that again. Now, those sort of accounts, your call accounts, can be very good for that as well. And also, of course, your own mortgage is what I use for school fees for next year. So work out what works for you. So we'd love to hear from you. So, post your comments on social media, and please listen into our next podcast, because there we're going to delve into investing, which is probably longer term for those longer term goals. And we definitely will be unpacking tax-free savings accounts.
I love investing. I'm so excited for the next episode.
Investing's building wealth. Savings more to achieve a goal in the short term, but investing's where your money works a little bit harder than you do.
Yep.